Welcome to Innovator Café, the entrepreneur go-to, with your host, attorney Dave Stevens. Through each episode, Dave and his guests provide resources and assurances to build a company growth roadmap. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and the website stevenslawgroup.com. Now here's the host of Innovator Café, Dave Stevens.
Hi, thank you, and welcome to Innovator Café. I'm Dave Stevens, and today my guest is Barry Cinnamon, the CEO of Cinnamon Energy Systems. It's a Silicon Valley solar company and an energy storage contractor. Barry's been in the business for quite some time. Since 2001, he's completed over 10,000 residential and commercial installations. And correct me if I'm wrong, Barry, but you had one of the first national solar installation companies around.
We
got acquired, right?
Yeah, we did that. We gave that a shot, and it was quite an experience.
No doubt. And I am a happy customer of Barry Cinnamon. I have both solar panels and a battery installation. And I love them. I really do for all the benefits that I get from them, and they pay for themselves. But this is not a plug for just Barry. Barry, we are here. This is the Innovation Cafe. This is our first episode, and our focus in Innovation Cafe is innovations around business and also tech. You know, entrepreneurs are all creative beings, right? And we have to be creative to really, to maneuver through all the different trials and tribulations you have in a business. So much that you can't see, so much things you cannot predict. And you've had quite a history of this, and you've been successful. And I'd like you to talk about, going back in time when you started out, tell us about, what differentiated you when you first broke out and started working in the solar industry.
Well, the solar industry has been up and down. We call it the solar coaster here in California and nationally.
Right.
And it's an incentive-driven, or at least it used to be. And when the incentives are here, the business can be doing great. When the incentives go away, kind of go into hibernation. I actually started my solar career back in the late 70s in college, and it was solar thermal. And when the tax credits went away, when oil prices went down, and Ronald Reagan basically said, I don't need these solar tax credits. I don't even need solar panels on the roof of the White House. I'll take those off. Jimmy Carter put those in, by the way. Then I couldn't find another job in the solar industry. And I tried and did a little bit of work in heat pumps and energy efficiency, and then said, this is going to take some time. So let me escape and go to business school, and maybe I'll learn something. And it's a good time to go to business school when you can't follow your heart. I got out of business school, and the solar industry was still in the doldrums. So I ended up in the computer industry for 15 years and started up a few companies, took one of them public, did an acquisition that got me out to California. And when the internet crashed in 2001, I'm sitting there in Silicon Valley saying, gee, no more funding, really hard to get traction. And then I read an article in the Mercury News about Clint Eastwood's solar panel the installations in Carmel Valley. And I said, gee, I wonder how solar is going to work for me here in Silicon Valley. I started looking into the numbers, and I said, gee, this is pretty good. The paybacks are pretty good. Then I had a few companies come in and give me estimates, and they kind of had no clue about the economics. One guy came by with his pickup truck and his dog and said, we're going to do this. And I said, let me just put solar on my house. And then if some friends wanted solar, and just kind of grew from there with a different, more economic approach to putting in solar systems. And that we just kind of grew with that over a 4 or 5 year period. Started up a few more offices in California. I tried to raise money for some technology that we had developed, and the venture community was not really interested in the boring solar panel mounting system technology that I had. They were really fascinated by new solar cell technologies from the likes of Solyndra and Nano Solar and Mia Soleil.
I remember those.
And I had all those companies in my office because they all came to talk to me because I was actually putting the junk on the roof.
Yep.
And and I kind of scratch my head and say, maybe this is going to work, but there's technology out there that already works pretty well, which is crystalline silicon, and that's ramping up. And the only impediment to crystalline silicon was the fact that there wasn't enough silicon. Once you solve that problem, that's the best technology. And so, I got lucky, or was a little bit smarter. We just continued to install ordinary panels, and the VCs in many cases, in those cases, were wrong. And I think the mistake that the investors made is they didn't have people with domain expertise, i.e., in the solar industry, making their investment decisions.
Remind me about Solyndra. I remember this well. They got a giant federal grant.
Mm-hmm.
Talk me through that example. It's an excellent example for the entrepreneurs on this call that talks about, but these guys even got free money and they still fail. How could you possibly fail?
Well, they failed, but what baffles me is why they got investor money to begin with for a technology that had so many fundamental flaws. So Solyndra's idea was use a thin film solar material that's very inexpensive to deposit basically on the inside of fluorescent tubes. So their idea was, we're going to collect energy on a cylindrical fluorescent tube, and there'll be some collectors inside, and it's going to be more efficient, and it's also going to be cheaper. In college, on a project, I did the analysis of collecting solar thermal energy from cylindrical tubes with a parabolic reflector underneath. And so we kind of looked at all this, and the conclusion we came to is, flat plates are better, because when you're collecting energy on a curved surface, it's only 100% collected when it's perpendicular to that surface. So they were efficiency from the beginning couldn't possibly be as good. But the investors were convinced that this was going to be great. And they ended up getting the investor money, gave them the $20 or $30 million they needed to get going, build a factory, and which was on 880. I think Tesla or Solar City bought that factory afterwards.
Right.
And they could just never show that the numbers were going to work. And we never installed it because we said, why should we go to the trouble of these fancy cylindrical tubes in a racking when we can just put flat panels at a 5-degree tilt, and it's going to be cheaper and better? They got $500 million from the DOE. It was one of the the guarantees that they got, and they tanked. And I still have the clip when I was on Fox News. Fox News asked me to come on and defend the solar industry, and I was able to defend the solar industry because the economics were pretty good. But I couldn't defend dumb decisions about investing in something that somebody in the business would say, this just isn't going to work. And I also remember going to a gathering with some people, and the VP of engineering and the VP production of Solyndra was there. And they said, we're going to ramp up and make these things so cheap that it'll be cheaper than flat panels. And I'm like, good luck. So that was my experience with Solyndra.
Right. Very close one. Very close. They didn't even last a year, did they? With that $500 million.
Yeah, they just kind of burned through it. And the DOE, who was running the loan program, they made a lot of money on other things. And that was smart. And I have to really shout out to Jigar Shah, who comes from the installation side of the solar industry. He started up a bunch of companies, actually started up Sun Edison. They grew really fast until they tanked after he left. But Jigar really understands the importance of deploying this technology, not just developing. So the solar, the DOE energy loan program is going to do great under Jigar's leadership.
Great. That's wonderful. Well, so let's demystify the current state of the solar industry. So I've got a house or a building now, and I'm looking at solar panels and possibly batteries. What's the math that you do that tells me whether or not it makes sense, and how do you size the system so that I can have a sustainable system that pays me back?
So there's obviously a lot of factors involved. There's three ways you can size a system on somebody's house or commercial building. You can see how many panels fit. You can see how many panels you need to get your electric bill to zero. And then you can also say, what's my budget? So we kind of work within those boundaries and we come up with something that is comfortable to the customer. It works out fine. And then it's a matter of doing the math, which very common, very established modeling out there, a program called PV Watts. And that allows us, based on the orientation, based on the weather in the local location, mostly the amount of sun they get, and based on the tilt angle, how much energy will be collected per year. We can really accurate with those energy collection estimates, take into account some soiling and panels get dirty and things like that. And then we map that into the electric rates. And then we can say, gee, if your electric bill for the year is 12,000 kilowatt hours and your system can generate 10,000 kilowatt hours, then you're saving the value of 10,000 kilowatt hours. Your remaining electric bill is only 2,000 kilowatt hours at, whatever the rate is, 40 cents a kilowatt hour in California. So you're going to end up with, say an $800 bill. So that's how we do it. But every utility has different rates, and every city has different weather. So it really is tricky to kind of come up with a national way of doing it. But there's software that allows you to do it based on the local rates, based on the cost of installation, which varies by locale. California is the most expensive, and based on the weather. Now, the challenge in the industry is we have competition, and our competition is the utility, and the utilities have buckets of money. And so for the past 20 years, the utilities haven't taken us that seriously. We've been able to continue with solar generation that would basically be directly offsetting what you would have otherwise purchased. But the utilities in California have gotten very aggressive, and now at least in California, they've pretty much wiped out the benefit of most solar generation during the day. So the only way you can kind of recover that benefit is with batteries. So it varies a lot. And I guess the lesson for an entrepreneur is, you have to move quickly and you have to be proactive and instantly reactive to changes in business conditions. And what's particularly challenging about the solar industry is a lot of those conditions come from outside factors. In other words, decisions by the government, the Public Utilities Commission, the federal government taking away tax credits that can dramatically change the trajectory of the business's growth. Some other software and hardware things aren't as incentive based or aren't as affected by these outside factors, but solar is quite a challenge in that regard.
So how do they get away with this? In California, we certainly have no shortage of sunshine. I don't want to get too much into politics, but if you were starting a business today, first of all, would you be in the solar industry? And how would you break into this and actually make this profitable for yourself? How do you do it now?
So I'm going to take a 60-second digression into politics since you used that word initially. So the decisions are made by the government, and our industry was particularly negatively affected by the decisions that were made by the California government. The California utilities and fossil fuel industries are by far and away the biggest contributors to state politicians, from local mayors on up to the governor. In 2022, last year, maybe a year and a half ago, the utilities donated $18 million to the legislators, to the mayors, everybody on up to the governor. PG&E wrote a $5 million check to Governor Newsom for his re-election campaign in 2022. And he basically appoints the Public Utilities Commission. So I'm not saying that there's a direct connection, but it's certainly a big coincidence that once that new Public Utilities Commission came in, every decision that affects the solar industry was made in a 5-0 vote against the solar industry. And 4 the utilities, maintaining the utilities monopoly. And utilities basically are regulated monopolies. But if their regulation is so biased by contributions, it's not doing a good job. And that's why California has the highest electric rates in the country, and they're going to continue to get way worse. So I think I might have taken a minute and a half there, but there's a pretty ugly political situation that's happening with solar in California, and it's devastating the industry.
Oh, sweet mother of irony, right? California of all places, to be so negative on solar energy.
Yeah. So that kind of, transitioning into what impact that has on the solar business and on my business, we saw this coming years in advance. We were one of the first companies that got into battery storage installations.
Right.
And the batteries do two things. One, they help you offset what the utilities took away as far as the reimbursement rate for electricity. In other words, you're not selling the electricity to the utilities back anymore. You're just using that energy when the utility rates spike in the evening. So they do that. And then the other thing they do is they provide blackout protection.
Yeah.
And I got to hand it to the utilities. Our best marketing source is when they turn the power off because of a windy day or because there's too much demand. And so that's really helped. And I see you smiling because I've heard, you've commented already that when the power goes out in your neighborhood, you used to know it because the generators go on, but your 3 batteries keep those lights on throughout whatever you need.
I got to really pay attention to see it happen. It's a click. It's that loud one. That's right. Even my clocks don't need to be reset.
Yeah.
No more.
The batteries have gotten really good. They do that, but they're expensive. So,
Sure.
And then the hypocritical thing that the utilities did and the legislators did is the excuse for changing the rules for solar reimbursements were done because low-income customers can't afford solar panels. Well, that's actually not true. Low-income customers can get something called community solar. They can get favorable loans. They get this thing called the CARE program. But the utilities made that change anyway. And not only did they affect the reimbursement rates, but they're taking away solar benefits on multifamily housing, on commercial buildings, and pretty much everywhere, so that the utilities are basically trying to monopolize solar. So the only way it really makes sense is it's their solar farms 500 miles away, and they get to charge a ton of money for it. But
it takes you back to the stories my father used to tell back in Detroit, how they used to have streetcars that would take them from the suburbs to the downtown Detroit. And the auto industry and the oil industry got together and removed those things, those public assets, right? Because they wanted to sell cars. They didn't want to just have this mobile society.
Yeah. Local anecdotes, Dave. There used to be a trolley up and down Highway 9. And so
I did not know that.
And I did not know that either until we were doing an installation in one of the local communities, Montecito. We were digging holes for our solar panel mounting system, and about 4 feet down, we hit a big chunk of steel right in the middle of the hole. And you can't move a hole. You can't move it. And so we had to get a torch in there and cut it. And it turned out to be a rail. And so when the auto companies dug up the streetcar lines, they just threw the debris in the hillside. It's still there. Anyway, it's just kind of bizarre.
You can recycle it.
You got to dig it up. But yeah, and you think back to what the auto industry did. They were profitable. They were very aggressive. They were eliminating the competition.
Sure.
They were unregulated. The utilities are ostensibly regulated, but it's really the money and the politics that's killing that. And I would just say to anybody, what can you do about it? Don't vote for any politicians that take money from the utilities or the fossil fuel companies. And that kind of doesn't really leave you with a lot of options in California, but that's where that's
like it. So is it still worth it to set up the system, or you just do it differently?
We do it differently. You got to put in batteries. If you're sensitive about the fact that the power is going to go out a lot, then you're going to value the batteries. It makes sense for commercial and it makes sense for residential, but the systems have to be smaller because you can no longer easily get good credit for the excess energy you provide during the day. Evening, the baseline is fine, But when you over generate, you can't sell it back. And that's why you need to buy a battery to store that energy. And that just adds to the cost. So the solar industry is going to go into a decline, 50% decline over the next few years, until electric rates come back so high that it's going to make sense again, or until some of these rules are changed.
No kidding. No kidding. Well, these are all really great examples of an entrepreneur who really had to dive and duck around all these different obstacles just to stay in business. You have to be innovative. It's not just technology. But tell us about your technology. You were also innovative in technology, and it saves money in the installations. How did that work?
Yeah, so I when I got started again in the solar industry in 2001, the way you install solar panels is you install an aluminum racking system on the roof, and then you install solar panels that have aluminum frames that clip into the racking system. And I kind of had the idea of, well, gee, there's just a lot of aluminum on the roof. It's a lot of work. Why don't we make the frame of the solar panel at the factory in Japan at the time out of material that would allow us to clip the solar panels directly to the roof? And that was my innovation. I went to Kyocera, who was the first or second biggest manufacturer of solar panels in Japan. And I brought this sample to them, and we were one of their good customers. And I met with their lead engineers. And with the interesting thing, I showed them this concept. I said, we can save a lot of money on the whole installation. And their engineer's response, that they bowed, they're very courteous, they listened to me, but their engineer's response was, well, but our solar panels will cost a little bit more and we won't be as competitive. And at that point, I said, well, we're going to have to work around that. So I teamed up with other manufacturers. Kyocera eventually came along, patented, and got some good value out of that. It's still to this day a technology that's underutilized in the solar industry. There's way more aluminum right now that goes on the roof to support the solar panels than the frames. But because of the incredible mass production of solar panels right now in China, there's still almost not enough appetite for that technology. I think it'll come back, and sitting on the patent, so we'll see what happens with that. But in the meantime, solar panels, which used to cost $1,000, are now costing $150.
That's incredible. That's incredible. Pricing yourself out of the industry,
Yeah.
the other way, right? Yeah. Right. That's very interesting. And so you have, these are really good examples of, going way back in time, of starting out in an industry where really the industry itself is working against you, right? I mean, it's almost like you need to be committed regardless of the price, whether you want, like food versus organic food, do you really want to clean the environment? Well, you'll pay a little bit more and you'll install solar if it costs that much more, right?
Yeah.
But you need more incentives like that than that, right? Than when you're trying to run a business, because people don't want to just throw money away, and then they really can't afford it if they do.
Yeah, and there are a lot of people who said I should have been committed, but I'm very committed to energy and saving money. But the tipping point for the solar industry happened about 10 years ago, when the altruism is there. People want to do the right thing for the environment. We weren't panicking as much about global warming, but it just made good, cost-effective business sense. And now it makes that sense in spades, except when you have utilities blocking you. But kind of turning it back to today, we saw this transition happening at the utilities. We saw that the fact that those rules were going to change in a way that were extremely hostile to the solar economics in California. And we also saw that there's a lot of demand because of global warming and because of other technologies like heat pumps and EVs. There was going to be more demand for electrification.
No doubt.
So we started to, and then the IRA was passed in August of 2022, and that supercharged it. There's a lot of incentives for heat pumps, heat pump water heaters, electrical upgrades, EVs, all kinds of other commercial products. And so we've added those capabilities, heat pumps and building electrification, to our portfolio. And we're more of an electrification company that also does solar and storage, but we can completely electrify your home or help a new construction come up with a building that's fully electrified, obviously with solar panels and batteries. So there's tremendous growth for that. And I would say at a high level, what we've done is we've kind of surfed from the solar incentives to the electrification incentives. And it's changed the business a little bit, but that's what people want. And we're meeting those needs basically with the same group of people, just adding another product line.
So if you were to set up, say, a neighborhood, a residential project up an obscure hill where they don't have access to electricity, could you outfit that neighborhood so they're essentially off the grid?
It's difficult. And the only difficulty is that there are utility regulations in California that prohibit an entity from generating its own power and selling it to a different parcel of land. So you basically, Dave, you can't.
So each house would have to be individually self-sustainable. Would that still work?
That would work, and there may be a way for houses to exchange energy but not sell it back and forth. And I don't know how to do that. But it frustrates me because we have an abundance of solar on my house. I got a $100 bill back from the utility last year, $500 2 years before. This year, I'm probably going to get about $300 back. And I'm like, I would say to my neighbor, hey, I'll run an extension cord over to your house. I got extra energy. That's illegal. Can't do that. Can't run a wire between two parcels unless you're the utility.
Right. I've got hope for you, Barry. I do. I think there's a way to make a house individually sustainable, right? And if you get into the architecture of the house, right, you could change everything. And it doesn't have to be entirely purposed for electricity, but think about an Eichler type of roof where it's not a peak, where you have things off angle. If you actually design the homes around the path of the sun and the geography around the house, is that even possible?
Yeah, you can easily, I mean, my house is a 55-year-old house in San Jose. I put solar panels on the east, the west, and the south roof, and I'm negative. So you can do it. For new homes, it would be even more efficient. So in California, you can do that. And what I'd also recommend is you have a parking area that has some additional solar panels. In an extended bad weather winter for a few days, you may need a generator. But the cost of the generator is tiny compared to that you're going to only use it for maybe 20 or 30 hours a year. Tiny compared to the savings you're going to have from avoiding paying the utility and avoiding running millions of dollars of wires from the grid to that new development. But you have to kind of get over the wall that the utility lawyers have built around their business model.
Right. Very interesting. And if they have, even you can get clean generators too. They can run off, home gas. My neighbor has a giant generator. He got that after we got solar panels, but before I got batteries. And the whole purpose was to cover the blackouts and the brownouts. Right. That thing turns on. It shakes the earth, right? I mean, no filters, there's no regulations on that either. It doesn't have to be quiet, right?
Well, just one of the regulations in our part of Silicon Valley is that in order to get a permit for a generator, it can't be louder than 62 decibels the neighbor's house or 20 feet away. So I can guarantee you that generator was installed without a building permit. And the reason why I know is we often are asked by people with generators actually to put in solar. And when we go to apply for the permit, the city says, well, they have you're saying there's a generator there. It's not permitted. Well, they got to permit the generator.
Oh boy.
So I'm not, I'm not suggesting you do anything to your neighbor, but that they are very strict in California about noise pollution, and
Yes.
you really have to spend extra money to muffle that generator. And there's ways to do it, but I guarantee you that's not a permitted generator.
That's probably right. In fact, when we only had panels and we didn't have batteries, right, the power would go out and we were left cold, right? So we would open the windows and sleep on the floor. It was cooler, right?
Huh.
And the generator, our houses are our properties are far apart, but our houses are fairly close. And the generator was right next to our bedroom windows, right? So it was in the worst possible place. And we either close the windows and cook in August, right? Or open the windows and be cool, right? And your batteries solve that problem. We close the windows, we don't hear a thing, right? We're pretty well self-contained, right? And I think I'm pretty much down to zero now by the end of the year, as far as the paying for the grid, right?
Yeah. No, it's a great feeling to get a check back from the utility.
Yeah, I love sticking it to them, right? Even if it is just me, right? And I've always been a big believer in the progress of the solar industry.
And
right?
and what's interesting, Dave, talking about entrepreneurship and transitions, the energy industry is going through a very, very rapid and thorough transition from cheap fossil fuel compared to the alternative, to very expensive fossil fuels compared to the alternative. And solar panels by far and away are the cheapest way to generate electricity. And there's going to be, it's going to take 10 or 20 years for that to flip, but the fossil fuel companies are going to do everything they can. The utilities will do everything they can to defend their monopoly. But at the end of the day, the technology will consume them, just as happened in the telecom industry when AT&T, Bell was superseded by cellular and all kinds of new technologies.
Right. Well, with the speed that gas, we see it increase much faster here in California. I drove across country just last year with my two boys on this road trip. I couldn't believe I found gasoline that was less than $3 a gallon. This morning I saw it. I think it was $6.50 per gallon for premium. Right?
Yeah.
So
No, I was in Arkansas a couple weeks ago. It's like $2.89.
Wow.
Really ridiculous.
Right. Well, much of that is out of the control of the oil companies anyway, right? So once that price goes back up, and sometimes you got to think that's what they're really hoping for. They want this new, alternative energy economy, right? With cars and with homes and everything like that. And the cars are still, they're still not even profitable to make electric cars now, right? But there's all of these government incentives to keep that going. Will that ever flip in the energy area? I mean, sure, PG&E is strong, but there's a big move worldwide to clean up the environment. Has that had any effect on your industry?
The biggest effect has been economic. So yes, there's the altruism and save the earth and the whole thing. But I mean, I'll give you an example. What's happening right now is the COP28 conference in Dubai.
Yep.
And it's being hosted by the biggest fossil fuel companies in the world. And they are absolutely not for eliminating fossil fuels, but fossil fuels are very clearly the biggest cause of this problem. But gradually, it is utilities right now. I'll give you an example. Utilities right now, the reason why they don't put in coal plants is because it's not economic. The reason why they don't put in, why they've canceled, I think, just about every single new nuclear power plant is, well, it takes 20 years to build. And, even right now, solar and batteries generate power more effectively and less expensively than nuclear, except during, night times in the winter. It's a problem. But then you've got natural gas plants and other things. What I believe is going to eventually be the solution to this long duration storage is lots of solar panels, electrolyzing water into hydrogen, and you can easily store that hydrogen and then use it in a fuel cell or use that in an engine to generate power pretty much all winter. So eventually, maybe, Dave, for our houses, we'll have more solar panels, we'll have a hydrogen tank, and we fill that thing up, and there'll be enough hydrogen to kind of get us through the winter on cloudy days and cold nights. That'll happen without a doubt, but it's going to be a 20-year transition.
Fascinating. And it could be really inexpensive too. It's a very clean burning fuel.
It's inexpensive and it's clean and it's great. But 20 or 30 years from now, luckily you live up on a hill, so you won't be underwater, but there's going to be, and the ice sheets are going to melt, and we're going to look at, the coastal areas are going to be flooded. Don't buy beachfront property. That's what I tell my friends.
Right. Wonderful. So for entrepreneurs out there, what is the future in energy? Where are the opportunities in energy for companies starting up?
So, this one of the things that I've been successful in my career of starting up a bunch of companies is doing what I like, getting into a field of engineering or manufacturing or product development that I like, and learning that particular field. And what I've seen happen again and again and again is people say, like Solyndra and NanoSolar and Mia Soleil, I really want to make a better solar cell. Well, I had that same thought too. My friend said, go make a better solar panel. I said, well, let me install them first. Let me get domain expertise. Let me understand where the biggest problems are. And then maybe I'll be able to identify something I can solve. So that's, in my view, the best way for entrepreneurs to pick something that they want to do is follow your heart, do what you like to do, but don't say, I'm going to start up a company right away. Understand that industry, do the boring, mundane stuff first. The solar industry, I did the boring stuff. I said, I'll learn about it by installing the solar panels on the roof. And then I came up with the idea of making it easier to install the solar panels. And so that's my suggestion for entrepreneurs.
That's brilliant. I think that is good advice across any industry and any technology. So we specialize here in the area of intellectual property. There's patents, there's trade secrets, and there's copyrights. And these are creative things. And all of those things are solutions to problems. And often what I see, and tell me your experience in this, you see people that are just not, they're malefficient at choosing the problem, right? I mean, if you could go out there and find real problems, real barriers to some type of success, some kind of savings, some kind of improvement, right? Then you solve those problems. And the most successful companies I've seen, both big and small, are companies that first stepped back and made a very clear description and expression of what the problem is before you dive in and try to solve it.
Yeah, and you'll see that the most successful companies have founders that had domain expertise, that understood that industry, may have repositioned things along the way a few times, but then moved very quickly to protect their products with patents, and then roll out and get those products out there and execute really fast. Silicon Valley is great about that. There's plenty of funding to help you execute fast. But if your solution isn't really optimal or a good one or economic, you're going to fail. And so your choices at that point, when you start to see it happen, are better do something else or evolve, or disappear. And a lot of solar companies have disappeared with technology bets that just didn't play out in long term from an economic standpoint.
Right. And regardless of how you position it, investors, they want to see things that are not just better but also cheaper.
Yep.
Long-term payback, sure, that's great too, but they have to have an alternative that the initial installation is cheaper than what they're doing right now, right?
Yep.
You look at a Tesla, for example, that's kind of backwards, right? There's no real cheap ones, right? There's less expensive ones. Even when you get that tax incentive, from buying that. Of course, if you lease it, you don't get that, right? But you get those tax incentives, and it just doesn't pay off.
Yeah. It's interesting, when you're looking at the EV market, Tesla's done a remarkable job. Elon Musk's, the best entrepreneur of not our generation, but in 100 years. And he really effectively tapped a lot of the early incentives for EVs. And he really did identify the issues that were important, which is basically mass production.
Yeah.
And started with batteries, build plants, and he's gone down the cost curve so much farther and faster than anybody else. I didn't think that it would be possible to have lower costs than Ford, GM, and Volkswagen, but he is by far cheaper than them, and that's why he's got so much market share, and that's why the company's going to continue to grow, and that's why you see companies like Ford and GM saying, "Gee, we're not making these cars as cheap as we want because the batteries are so expensive." You don't hear Elon whining about that. He solved that problem.
No, that's right. That's right. That's right. That's right. And also, what helps Elon, in all fairness, is that he's not regulated like the big companies, right? So with the low volume of cars compared to the millions of cars of Ford and Toyota, he's had that ability to move quicker in many ways. Hey, but nothing against him. He took advantage of all of his advantages, all of his opportunities, and there's no knocking him.
Yeah, and the UAWs is coming after him to unionize his plants and increase his costs, just like they've effectively done for GM and Ford.
Right.
But even if he has to pay more, the mass production that you can achieve, I mean, there's just less labor that goes into an EV.
That's
and
right.
He's got it figured out.
That's right. That's right. That's right. And there's something you really need to understand as an entrepreneur too is, you're not going to inherit all of the costs of the incumbents, right? In fact, much of what you're doing is to get the cost down. Get the cost down. It's inherent in an electric vehicle because just getting rid of all the fluids is so much better. You're not just getting rid of gasoline, you're getting rid of coolant, oil, right? I mean, if you look at how clean that thing is, it's not just clean from an exhaust standpoint. It's clean all around. There's nothing to change.
Yeah. I got a few gallons of windshield washer fluid, and that's kind of all I need for my EVs. That's it.
Right. And stay tuned. I'm sure someone at Tesla or somewhere else is going to obviate that and find a way to have self-cleaning windows. Right?
Yeah.
That's where technology is gonna beat everybody. Yeah. Well, that's wonderful. So how about some closing advice to young entrepreneurs, not just in the solar industry, but in general? If you really got this idea, you've got this passion, what were the first steps that you would take to really follow your passions and your goals and to be that entrepreneur?
I think the most important thing is just having the guts to go out there and do it on your own and find a way to get started, come up with a proof of concept on a nutshell, use your savings, borrow money, and just kind of get started. But it takes a lot of guts. It takes a lot of persistence. It takes a lot of no's. And the ones that succeed are the ones that are proving the naysayers wrong, that it really was a good idea. It's good to have some business background. It's good to have, you have to have in-depth domain expertise and technical expertise in your field, but you also have to have a little bit of a business sense, or, find a partner that has that, and then the two of you kind of go attack it. But it's just having the confidence that you're going to make it happen, come hell or high water.
That's a really good point. I mean, people don't always show up with all of those different skills. Look at an engineer versus a salesperson, right? They are equal. They have their own values, but they're not interchangeable by any sense, right?
Yeah.
Rarely do you see them with all of those skills. You've got the rare skill. You've got entrepreneur sense. You also have some sales ability, which is greatly underrated, I think, in many industries. I'll tell you, every inventor I run into, they think, sales. Once I build this shiny thing, they're going to love it so much, they're going to be trying to steal it from me, right? I mean, you need to have sales skills also, because you have to educate them about why you're better, why they should buy your product.
The most successful companies are have very strong sales leadership. I just think back to one of the prototypical the tech companies is Apple. It was Wozniak was kind of the technical brains, and Steve Jobs was the business, sales guy, and they just took the world by storm and continued to thrive.
No doubt. Well, Barry, this has been really great, very informative, and thank you for joining us today. Any other closing thoughts?
No, I'm just Dave. You guys provide such a great service from a legal standpoint. Love working with the Stevens Law Group. You've got great people. You've got a great business model, which isn't just everybody working in one room. You're taking advantage of the internet and remote work and farming that out. But it's just been a pleasure working with you and a pleasure having you as a customer and just being great on this podcast. And I'll have to have you back on my podcast one of these days.
That's a deal. We can count on that. Thanks again, Barry. Have a great day.
All right. Thanks, Dave. Bye.
Bye.
You've been tuning into Innovator Café, the entrepreneur go-to, with your host, attorney Dave Stevens. You can find more episodes on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and the website, StevensLawGroup.com. Thank you for your positive reviews, comments, questions, and for sharing this show with others.